it is time to create the best World of Warcraft expansion ranking list that you have ever seen. This video is going to be so controversial. It is going to make you so emotional, so happy, but so depressed at the same time. It is going to be fantastic. Make sure to leave a like, share the video with a friend, do all that great stuff. It helps the channel grow a ton. But let's get into the rankings. So as you can see down here, we got, classic all the way through Shadowlands. As we know, when an expansion is coming to an end, you gotta rank it compared to the other expansions, right? I've kind of said my opinion on Shadowlands, so you can kind of guess where I'm going to rank it. But let's actually firmly place it in its rank. Classic World of Warcraft. Where does classic rank, right, in comparison to all of the other expansions that have ever existed? In my opinion, classic is middle of the pack. It was the beginning of World of Warcraft. It was the average World of Warcraft, right? You could say it was maybe an A, maybe a B, right? It had a lot of good things. It's what made WoW WoW, right? So I'm gonna have it in the B, right? We've seen from, classic being released and vanilla and everything like that, that maybe it was more nostalgic than it was actually good. There were a lot of things about it when classic released that were actually not really that fun. I'm not gonna put it too high, but I'm not gonna put it too low because it deserves its recognition for creating one of the best video games that has ever been created. One of the best, if not the best MMO that has ever been created. So it's gonna stand firmly at B.
You are not prepared.
Now, in my opinion, disclaimer, this video is all about my opinion on the expansions. It's not correct. It's not anything like that. It's what my opinion is. Burning Crusade is gonna be in the C tier. Burning Crusade had terrible leveling zones. It funneled every single Horde and Alliance character into the same zone at the very start. It was absolutely awful. And just in my opinion, we saw it with Burning Crusade Classic as well. Its launch was pretty mediocre. Not to mention the raids themselves were okay. We had Black Temple, which was an amazing raid, but other than Black Temple, what did we really have, right? There was Karazhan. Karazhan was pretty good, but it was a 10-man raid, right? I think it was a 10-man raid, but it was a 10-man raid, right? So overall, I just don't think there was very many good things that came from Burning Crusade. I think it is another one of those nostalgic things that people are going to reminisce about that doesn't actually make the expansion good itself, right? People think they loved this expansion.
You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon. You don't want to do that.
But when you went back and played it in Classic, it was yeah, it was good, but it wasn't crazy good, right? So it's going to stay in the C tier. It was average. It was pretty average.
I tell you this, for when my days have come to an end, you shall be king.
Here is a very controversial take. Wrath of the Lich King is going into the A tier. Now, I only have one expansion in S tier, but Wrath of the Lich King is going to be in the A tier. It had two of the greatest raids that have ever came out in ICC and Ulduar. It had the Death Knight class, which is arguably one of the most fun classes that has ever been added to the game, and that is in the game. But there were fairly good dungeons. The leveling was really fun. Northrend was crazy good. It had Grizzly Hills. It had all these great zones. Overall, Wrath of the Lich King, definitely going into the A tier. Everyone's probably going to say it's S tier or A tier at the lowest. I just think that the beginning of Wrath got missed in the sense that Everyone remembers ICC and Ulduar, but no one really remembers the beginning of the re-release of Nax or Obsidian Sanctum. Took a very long time to actually bring ICC and Ulduar into the game. So in my opinion, it's going to stay at A tier. The reason it is so high is just the end of the expansion was so good, but it's going to be in the A tier. Cataclysm, in my opinion, is also in the A tier. This is another controversial take. People hate Cataclysm. Now, I think people hate Cataclysm because of it breaking up the world. It changed so much about the core mechanics of World of Warcraft itself that people didn't like it. The game became a little bit more complicated. The zones got completely revamped. A ton of the classic zones got revamped. People didn't like that. They revamped old raids like Zul'Gurub and Zul'Aman into dungeons. They did a ton of things like that. But overall, the expansion was generally pretty good. It had some really good raids. It had, you know, Firelands. Bastion of Twilight wasn't terrible. Throne of the Four Winds wasn't terrible. I really loved Tol Barad as a PvP zone. In my opinion, it was way better than Wintergrass. Not to mention the dungeons were fantastic. They're some of the most fun dungeons I've ever done. Stone Core is fantastic. You know, I loved ZA and ZG as dungeons. They were also great. I personally started really playing World of Warcraft in Cataclysm, so that's why it's generally pretty high for me. It might be nostalgia, it might be something else, but overall I had a blast playing Cataclysm. It had really good zones too. Twilight Highlands, you know, Deep Home, Vashir is such a good zone. I know everyone hates it, but overall, in my opinion, Cataclysm is in the A tier. Now here is the only S tier expansion. It's gonna be Mists of the Pandaria. Mists of the Pandaria had some of the best raids. It had the best class design. It had some of the best leveling content, in my opinion. It had some of the best non-hardcore content. Its PvP was so good. Its dungeons were generally really good. It brought in challenge modes, which was the beginning of Mythic Plus, but was a better version of Mythic Plus. It brought so much to the table in terms of an expansion that it all got overshadowed by pandas. People hate Mists of the Pandaria because of pandas. People ignore Throne of the Thunder, ignore Siege of Orgrimmar, ignore Heart of Fear, ignore Terrence of the Endless Spring. 4 really good, fun raids because pandas. Crazy, crazy thought to me personally, that you could just ignore this great expansion and say it's bad because they brought pandas into the game that have been in the game since Warcraft 3. I don't get it. I personally don't. This was the best expansion that has ever existed. Nothing will probably ever come close because it didn't have infinite power grinds. Yes, it had the legendary cloak, but at a point that did stop. Each patch, it stopped. You had the best class designs. Classes were so fun to play. You gained so many new abilities. Oh, it was just amazing. It was just fantastic. So overall, Mists of the Pandaria is in the S tier, and I'm very happy about that.
This was not our destiny. Times change.
Warlords of Draenor is next. We are going to put Warlords of Draenor in B. Warlords of Draenor had some really fun raids. Heimal was really good. You had Blackrock Foundry, which is considered probably a top 5 raid of all time. And I really enjoyed Hellfire Citadel. I had some really good memories with that, doing the raid with my guild, doing LFR, doing a whole bunch of things like that. The class design in WoD was maybe better than MOPS, maybe a little worse. I can't really tell. You know, like it's up to interpretation. I prefer Mop's class design over WoD's, but WoD had also really, really good class design. The leveling content in WoD was also really good, right? You know, Shadow Moon Valley, Frostfire Ridge, you know, you had Gorgrond, you had all these really great zones with really lore heavy content that the casual player base would love, and the hardcore player base would learn and not care about if they didn't care about. But if you kind of did care about, like me, I kind of care about the quest lines and the storylines. I actually learned a ton from doing this expansion about the history of WoW. It was really, really, really good. Obviously, Warlords of Draenor gets the bad reputation because of garrisons and because of the long 6.2 drought that occurred. But if you take those two things away, which, yes, they were major parts of the expansion itself was overall generally good. So that's why I'm going to put it into the B tier. Now we get Legion. Legion is going to be in the A tier. A lot of people will probably have this in the S tier for them. Honestly, it's probably the best A tier. I would rather Legion over Wrath and over Cataclysm for the most part. It had the best leveling zones excluding Cataclysm. It had the second best leveling zones, right? It had all of these great story characters that you've never heard before that were introduced, and the quests weren't overall annoying, and you leveled generally really fast. You know, you had legendaries, you had the artifact weapon system, which was really good. Obviously, AP, as we know now in hindsight, was not very good as a system, but the overall artifact weapons themselves were so fun to play with. Getting that new ability that we really hadn't had in a long time, because we didn't really gain anything new in WoD. So gaining that new ability in Legion was so fun to play with. You really felt like you were a mage, or you felt like you were a paladin when you were playing in Legion, which was great. It had some really good raids, right? Emerald Nightmare, though it gets hated on because of its difficulty and how easy it was an aesthetically pleasing raid. It looked fantastic. The Emerald Nightmare is something we've always talked about going to in the Emerald Dream. You get the 3 boss raid, which is great. There's Nighthold, which is also considered a top 5 raid of all time. And then you have Antorus the Burning Throne, which in my opinion was one of the best raids that has ever been out. Argus was a crazy fun fight. So overall, Legion, it had its flaws. The legendary system was really rough at the beginning. But overall, Legion, great expansion. BFA is going into the C tier. I personally didn't dislike BFA that much. It obviously really wasn't that fun to play, right? The Azerite system was mediocre at best. The whole Azerite gear situation was really confusing as a new player. I wasn't even a new player when playing it. I was still a little bit confused about how it all worked. So I could see how bad it was, but the storylines were really, really good. The zones that you leveled in were fantastic. Drusvar is probably, if not my favorite zone to level in. It might beat Westfall, but I'm not too sure about that yet. Drusvar was so fun to play in. Overall, BFA had its weaknesses. I'm not saying it was a great expansion. It had a lot of problems, but it honestly wasn't as bad as I personally think that everyone gives it the rap for. Corruption was a really good system later on, right? Buying corruption made corruption really nice, but when it was completely RNG, it was not a fun system. But once you could buy it, it was really good. It was the same with legendaries in Legion. Once you could buy your legendaries, they were really fun as well. So overall, BFA is going in the C tier. I think it is on the same level as Burning Crusade. It had some upsides to it, but overall it is a pretty average expansion. Shadowlands is an interesting one. I haven't really thought about where I would be putting Shadowlands. Am I putting Shadowlands in the C tier, at the bottom of C tier, or does it go in the D tier? Let's really deeply think about this. If I think about it from the beginning of the expansion, okay, let's think about it. Conduit energy existed. Conduits themselves were terrible. Alts were basically impossible to play. Renown system was pretty awful. Torghast sucked. Legendaries were awful. You had to spend a ton of money to get them. You couldn't swap covenants, which was really bad. The moss sucked. So yeah, overall, the beginning of the expansion was pretty bad. Not gonna lie. So I think it's gonna have to stay in the D tier. I honestly can't see an expansion getting any worse than Shadowlands is right now. Obviously, they made some changes later on, right? Like now you can swap covenants pretty easily, but you know, the conduit system, the soulbind system, all that still exists. You know, covenant abilities still exist. You know, legendaries are still extremely overpriced. Overall, Shadowlands is gonna have to go in the D tier. It might be my least favorite expansion that's been out there. The leveling zones were mediocre. I didn't really enjoy any of them except Ardenwald. I think Ardenwald was the best one, and that's just because aesthetically it was really pleasing. But the storylines for all the quests, I don't really remember. Shadowlands is just going in the D tier. Not much I can say about it. It just got to go in the D tier. Let me know where you guys are ranking Shadowlands in your tier list and rankings. I think generally this is a pretty common list of rankings for every single person. But yeah, let me know where you have them ranked, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.